We had played nice and tried to be comfortable for so long that we often didn't correct this CEO and his behavior, our desire to be comfortable, to play nice, and it finally cost us something in terms of embarrassment, relationship. The antithesis of nice not being mean. The antithesis of nice is what I call nerve. Practicing nerve is sort of like a muscle. Sometimes it's a 2, sometimes it's a 10, but the more you go, the better and stronger those muscles get.
How does one deal with that uncomfort in moments where it could keep them from venturing into that path of being uncomfortable?
I think that you have to.
Are you tired of playing nice? We all know that comfort can keep us stuck, but what is the true price of that silence? Today I'm honored to welcome Amira Barger, an award-winning Executive Vice President of Communications and Change Management and the author of the powerful new book, The Price of Nice, Why Comfort Keeps Us Stuck. Amira is here to challenge you to stop prioritizing surface-level agreement and start embracing your nerve. We're diving into the 4 actions for real change, how to disrupt toxic positivity, and why your willingness to be inconvenient is far more valuable than your compliance. Get ready to shift your thinking. This conversation starts now. Amira, it's so good to have you today. How are you?
Well, it's so good to be with you. I'm so glad we're reconnecting in this way after getting the chance to work together professionally and now have this conversation.
Yes, this is long overdue. So, talk a little bit about your profession. What are you doing right now? What are you working on?
Yeah, I like to describe myself to people as a behavioral communications consultant, professor, and author. Those are some of the many hats that I get to wear professionally. And I'm at a large communications firm, right now, a global one called Edelman. And I get to spend my days helping companies, governments, nonprofit or non government organizations think about how they connect with their people and with their consumers through the power of communications, whether that's executive positioning, internal communications, product communications, you name it. I get to help shape what those stories they're telling are and how people connect with who they are as companies and institutions. And I also get to teach that work at several universities here across the US, mainly Cal State East Bay and UCSF. I get to teach the next generation of leaders how do you use stories powerfully to connect people and to reimagine the world that we all get to live in. And I'm also an author. I have a book coming out this October 2025. October 28th exactly of this year called The Price of Nice. And a lot of it is a telling of the things I've learned as a communications professional on how to reimagine my own behaviors in the world that I shape and also how to be part of, the worldwide community and shaping the world that we all get to experience and live in for the better.
That sounds like some very engaging and interesting work. I'm really interested in understanding the stories without giving away any intellectual property, but what are some of the stories that you have found yourself really connecting with and helping others on?
I really love when I get to do a lot of the internal communications work with people, whether it's one on one or in smaller, intimate groups, because that's when you really hear a lot of interesting stories about how people have shifted in the workplace and pivoted depending on what's going on, right? Because the outside world impacts the inside of our organizations. And so, an example that comes to my mind, a story of my own that I've used to help people with the tools that I teach. Back in, I would say it was 2013, my executive team, we had a consultant from Harvard come in and speak to us as we were reimagining our new strategic plan and rebranding our organization. And one of the very first exercises or pieces of homework she gave us for this multi month process was she wanted us to keep a creative journal. And we all collectively groaned. We were thinking to ourselves and saying out loud, a work journal, a work diary. I don't want to do that. Who has time for that? And we were having a little bit of a bad attitude about it, but we did it anyhow. And what she asked us to do was to, over the course of at least 4 weeks. She said, "Commit to at least 4 weeks of this with me, and you'll see how transformative it can be in helping you pivot." She said, "Write down the processes and the conversations and the behaviors in your workplace, in your executive team that frustrate you, that are going unchallenged and unchanged." And it's a very simple set of instructions, but it was also really revealing for us. We started to see over time as a collective group there were actually a lot of processes, behaviors, and attitudes that we would just sort of sweep under the rug or let go because we wanted to keep things really comfortable and we wanted to sort of play nice, if you will. And how this comes into the work I get to do every day is, we talked about in this creative journal a phrase many in the business world would have heard called sacred cows, right? Those are those rules, leaders, habits within an organization that you don't touch, you don't challenge them. They're sacred. We keep them, they as are they are. It's sort of the this is how we've always done it kind of mentality. And we had a sacred cow in this organization, and I would say that sacred cow was our entire CEO, and I'll call him Marty for the sake of anonymity. And Marty was a someone who was beloved in the community, considered a visionary by some people, but within the walls of our organization, he bristled at critique. He would dismiss feedback. And he had a really toxic way about him, and he only surrounded himself with yes people. And as an executive team and even our board of directors, we rarely, if ever, pushed back on Marty because we were, trying to keep things comfortable and not rock the boat and play nice. And so we had this great big meeting coming up. And so we fly to Hill here in the US, so Washington, D.C., where all of our elected officials are. And we're going to sit down and have a meeting where we're hopeful to walk away with $9 million. And so we sit down with Congresswoman Jackie Spear. And Marty, our CEO, leads our pitch and he finishes our pitch and he decides to end our pitch for these dollars with his signature catchphrase that he had sort of become known for and we'd warned him about before. But he pauses and he says, "Well, Jackie," to the Congresswoman, "I don't know if I'm just sipping my own Kool-Aid." And in that moment, the oxygen left the room, it left my body, my eyes were rolling out of my head. The Congresswoman's staff people were frozen and sort of, jaws on the floor. And Congresswoman Spear looked at Marty and said, "You really shouldn't say that to me. And by the way, it was Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid." And why that's important is Congresswoman Spear was a survivor of the Jonestown Massacre here in the United States. Back in the 70s, it was a 900 people, a mass unaliving with a cyanide-laced beverage, Flavor Aid. So the one person in the world Marty should not have said that little phrase to, he said it to. And that's where that phrase comes from. The origins of that phrase, sipping my own Kool-Aid, has a very dark and horrific history behind it. And the point was, we had played nice and tried to be comfortable for so long that we often didn't correct this CEO and this leader and his behavior. I had warned him before about the origins of that phrase and asked him to stop it, but he didn't. And our ability to not be challengers, disruptors finally caught up with us, right? Our desire to be comfortable, to play nice, it caught up with us and it finally cost us something in terms of embarrassment, relationship, and, just not being able to save face with the Congresswoman and her staff in this moment. And so I hear stories like that all the time where I try to help leaders and organizations figure out how do we move beyond the behaviors that create the scenario where something like that, something terrible, something embarrassing, something not helpful to any of us happens. And how do we become disruptors and challengers? And how do we pivot within our organizations to create a world that is much more inclusive, much more, disruptive, and much more audacious, if you will?
Audacious is a very interesting choice of words because it leads me to ask you,
Mhm.
as some I'm sure are probably thinking, how in the world do I present that level of audacity when there could be risks to me speaking up, the risk to me challenging, and I don't want to risk my positionality, my opportunities, etc. What do you say to people that are thinking about that very thing?
I talk a lot about the antithesis of nice not being mean. To me, the antithesis of nice is what I call nerve. It's sort of that idea of that audaciousness to challenge, to disrupt, to be the squeaky wheel, to be the person who says the quiet parts out loud. And I often tell people practicing nerve and audaciousness is sort of like a muscle, right? Where you go to the gym and you have to work those muscles out or they'll atrophy, right? But the more you go and the more you go through the motions of your regimen, the better and stronger those muscles get. And I think the same is true with practicing being audacious and having nerve in the workplace. And I tell people sometimes I practice nerve and audaciousness at a 2 on the dial. Imagine a dial. Sometimes it's a 2, sometimes it's a 10, sometimes it's a 20. And where I am on the dial, it depends. It depends on the person across from me. Does this person have a growth mindset? Are they the kind of person who would be open to audaciousness, to nerve? Are they a person who's open to questions? What is my position in the organization? Do I have any sort of formal authority or power or decision making? And that might change how much nerve or audaciousness I practice. So, for every person, the answer is going to be a little bit different, right? But practice makes perfect, or at least makes progress, because perfection's not a good goal. Practice makes progress. And so, practicing audaciousness and nerve in simple ways, something as simple as, in that next meeting you're in, ask one more question is something I'll often coach people to. Just one more question that might spur an idea, that might spur a conversation or stop people in their tracks to think, oh, maybe we need to reconsider this, or be the person who says, "Oh, actually, you know what? I really was enjoying what Dwayne was saying. Can we actually go back to his point?" That's a simple way to practice nerve or audaciousness. So there are, I think, small behavior changes that are anything but small. Sometimes those quote unquote small things are actually the very thing that all teams or groups of people need to just pause and to think deeply or to reconsider something. And that can be you practicing audaciousness and nerve, because people often think of it as sort of like table flipping, burning it all down, revolutionary behavior. And that's not always what it is. That's not always what I mean. Sometimes audaciousness or nerve is asking one more question, saying who else should be in the room here. So and so isn't here. Let's bring them in. They might have perspective. It can be something simple, can be something that is one behavior that could have the power to change so many things. So, start small, start where you are, and think about your level of power and positionality and who are the allies in the room who will back you up when you're challenging, disrupting, and practicing being audacious.
It's almost like we get stuck on words. When we hear about audacity,
Mhm.
nerve, we automatically think, like you said, we have to create this big show of what we're doing, and it's going to create so much pushback and blowback. But really, even in the example you provided, it's
Mhm.
really just a suggestion or a
That's right.
recommendation. It sounds like it's about just being more forthright when it comes
Huh?
to recognizing opportunities and
Mhm.
speaking about those opportunities. So maybe if we're not stuck on the word audacity, it may come out a little bit easier for some people to actually execute it.
Exactly.
So all of this has led to you writing this book. Why?
Because I've spent, all 39 years of my life, at least the last 20 years, unpacking, you know, a role that I felt was handed to me, that role of sit pretty, play nice, in many cases, stay silent. And I was so tired of being told to be palatable when what I wanted to be was powerful in places and spaces that I entered. And I know too many people who have a similar experience. Every time I would tell someone about the idea for this book or even the title, they would say, "Oh, yeah, that's a book I need." Like, yes, we need to stop playing nice. It hasn't served us. And so I knew that there were people who were having a similar experience of, there are moments where I know I need or want to be direct, to be clear, to challenge, to disrupt, to ask more questions. And they didn't always have the tools and they didn't always feel that they had the autonomy to do those things. And so my hope is that through my own mistakes along the way, my own pivots along the way, that I can give people a blueprint of here's how I did it. And maybe some of these tools can also be of use to you in your life. How you practice these tools, I call them promising practices in the book, may look very different from how I practice those. And that's okay. I hope that you will take it and mold it to your life, to your situation, and that we'll all wake up and be a little more direct, a little more clear, a little more specific, which to me is that's what audacious and that's what nerve is clarity. And that's what I think more of us want.
You talk a lot about community. Take us back. Where did it start with you? When did you
Mhm.
make the realizations? What were you going through during those times? And what did it take for you to really understand the things that you're talking about and
Mm.
you're supporting others on now?
Let's go back to the first moment that I realized what nice is and what it cost us. And so in the book, actually the preface, which most people don't read, you should read the preface. It's a good way to start the book. Most people go straight to the intro, but I tell this story from my childhood, right? Way back in the beginning when I was 9 years old. And I joke that, I'm an 80s baby, but the 90s raised me, and I love and miss the 90s deeply. But one thing that was true in the 90s is before we had our wonderful little gadgets called cell phones, our whole lives in these little boxes, we didn't have a fun, surefire way for people to know that we had gone on vacation. And I tell this, sort of funny story in the book about how my sisters and I had these two little friends, blonde haired hazel eyed twins. And every year they would come back from vacation with what we would call back then vacation hair. Which was just like the braided hair, the rose. And every year they'd come back, and because their hair is much more thin and fine, it would very quickly be this fuzzy haystack. And so they would beg my mother, can you redo our hair? Can you rebraid it and make it look like theirs? Instead of pointing at me and my sisters who always had braids. That was our regular daily hairstyle. And so my mom would, sit down and part their hair. And there was this one year where she was redoing their braids. And I just remember sort of looking back, and it felt like this massive Broadway show and production. Like they were oohing and awing and going, "Oh my gosh, my head hurts. This hurts so bad. I think my hair's falling out. Is my head bleeding? Does your head hurt this bad? Does your hair fall out?" And little 9-year-old Amira, for whatever reason that year, she snapped. And so they were doing all of this, the dramatics, and I just said, "Well, it's because it's not for you and it's not for your hair." And my mom looked at me with the death stare that only a mother can and said, "Amira, that's not nice." And what I walked away with that day was, the reason I said to them, it's because it's not for you, it's not for your hair, is I tell people I'm a very practical person. I'm a September Virgo. And so I'm always locked into like solutions. And in my little 9-year-old mind, I was like, oh, well, their hair is too thin. And yes, it hurts because it's too tight for that type of hair texture. And so I was just being clear and direct and saying, well, your hair's not made for those braids. So if you want your head to stop hurting and if you don't want your hair to fall out, you shouldn't get those braids. In my mind, that was just a solution and very practical. I wasn't trying to be mean, but that is certainly how it came off. And um, in communications, I teach a tool from Charles Duhigg in his great book, Super Communicators, that in life, as humans, when we connect, we are usually in one of three conversation types. So we're often in a practical conversation, right? That's about solutions and steps. We're often secondarily in an emotional conversation. That's about wanting empathy, right? And having a need met. Or thirdly, we're in a social conversation. That's about connection and having fun and meeting new people. Little Amira back then, with the twins and the braids, I was locked into practical conversation. Here's the solution: don't get braids, your head won't hurt. The twins were in an emotional conversation. They wanted empathy. They wanted someone to recognize, oh, it hurts, and I'm so sorry that it hurts. And they wanted comfort and they wanted recognition and acknowledgement of that pain. And little 9-year-old Amira didn't know that. So while I don't think I was wrong back then, I could have handled it better had I had some different tools. And I had walked away, though my mom didn't intend, that day, thinking to myself, wow, even if what you say is true and accurate, if it makes someone else feel uncomfortable or upset, you are the problem. And that's one of the reasons I wrote a whole book about the price of nice. Again, my mom and the twins didn't intend for me to have that lesson that day. But as I've moved through my career and just my life, I've realized that that is how so many people do see and perceive things. Like if you say something to me and I get uncomfortable, you're a problem now. And that's not nice, quote unquote. Even if it's true, even if it's accurate, even if it's helpful, right? And even if I worked really hard on my delivery of what I said to you, people will often write you off, put you in a corner, or try to silence you because you made them uncomfortable. And I wrote this book to sort of unpack that we have this cultural obsession with niceness and comfort. And I really think that that desire for comfort is what keeps so many people in the workplace, in communities, playing nice instead of being audacious, instead of practicing nerve. And we have to learn how to be uncomfortable for a little bit and work through the discomfort to get to the other side. And I hope that this book gives people those tools to sit in the discomfort, work through it, and get to the other side.
I just feel more endeared to you because I'm a September Virgo too. So everything you just said, Amira, I am 100% on board with.
I love it.
I am so logical in the way I think and the way I perceive things and the way I believe other people should perceive things too. So I totally get where you're
Mhm.
coming from. It reminds me of a relationship I have with a friend of mine who is the polar opposite. They're very
Mhm.
emotional. So they would make decisions in life based on emotion. So, you know, us Virgos being logical,
Mhm.
we want to know why you made that decision. And they would always come back and almost be flustered because they didn't have a
Mhm.
logical or practical answer to give me. They just did things out of feeling and I couldn't get it. And it wasn't until somebody I was listening to, I can't remember who it was, but I remember hearing that it may have been Simon Sinek. He must have been talking
Mm.
about this in one of his podcasts, but he talked about how he communicates with his head, and I was like, okay, I get
Mhm.
that. I communicate with my head, but he had a friend that communicated with their heart.
Yep.
And unfortunately, because you communicate with your head, you believe that everybody should communicate the same, or they're not really making sense of the world as they should.
Yeah.
It's almost like this opportunity for us to help them. You know, we look at
Mhm.
it as, hey, we're going to give you more information. We're going to help you understand this a little bit more and dig deeper because we know there's something in there.
Yes.
And that would put us at conflict a lot of the times
Mhm.
because people who work with their heart, who think with their hearts, just don't have those same logical reasons, and it's
Mhm.
okay. They just communicate
That's right.
differently. So what you said there really makes sense, and I totally get it. Totally resonate with it. When you talked about comfort and being uncomfortable,
Mhm.
comfort is something that most people want to reside in.
Yeah.
You hear a lot of people who don't want to rock the boat, people who don't want to be perceived differently or negatively. I'm a firm believer that, you know, as you're saying with your story, that your impact trumps your intention 100% of the time. And it's your duty to ensure that that connection between your intention and the impact that you are intending to have is as close as possible. So it's really understanding
I
the people or the person you're communicating to make sure that that alignment is as close as possible, and being very careful with your words in some cases. How does one deal with that uncomfort in moments where it could keep them from venturing into that path of being uncomfortable? Because sometimes people just get uncomfortable and they're like, okay, I'm
yeah.
going to avoid this moving forward. How do people prevent that from happening?
I think that you have to have intention to use right? That your intent matters, and I think that someone who is oriented towards a growth mindset and growing as a person and consistently evolving is a person who will be open and willing to find the tools, find the voices, find the people that can help me understand how to sit with discomfort and move through it. It's not easy, and I think that's important to acknowledge and always recognize, because when I talk with people like, "Oh, that's so hard," I'm like, "It is hard." And as someone who even wrote a whole book about it, it's still hard. And it is a practice. And I think that's what I want people to walk away remembering is that there is no arrival point or destination that we're working towards when it comes to practicing nerve versus nice and moving through discomfort. It is a constant evolution, right? Because every scenario, every instance, every person, every zip code you're in, whatever the context of what you're dealing with will change and will change the scenario, and you have to be able to evolve even in the moment. And so you'll never arrive as a person who, okay, now I know how to be uncomfortable. Now I know how to practice nerve. It's sort of with every instance that comes, you do it a little bit different, right? The way I practiced nerve yesterday might be very different from today because I'm constantly taking in different context clues and different people's needs and feelings and considerations as I think about my impact on the scenario and the people around me. And so I think you have to be a person who is willing to evolve. And what does that mean? That means listening to good podcasts like this one here to hear how others have done it. It means picking up a book or two. It means being in community and conversation with other people to understand how they've moved through or sat with discomfort and come out the other side. And I really think that that's something in a digital world that we have lost some of is connecting with people and being in community with people to learn how to move through this world. I think we have so much quick access to things digitally that we sometimes forget to just do life with people. And I think that doing life with people is one of the best ways to learn how to sit with discomfort and to move through it and to connect with other humans in powerful ways where you do find those connections, as you said, from your intent to your impact. You have to actually be doing life with people. And so that means putting the little box that has our full lives in it down the phone and being in community with people and having conversations. I love my friend groups where we talk about the books that we recently read and what we learned versus, scrolling on, the TikTok and the videos. Because there's so much richness in, hearing how someone else dealt with a scenario, dealt with a really hard conversation or a really terrible situation at work. That is part of how I've learned to do what I now do today and to constantly evolve is I was just doing life with other people who learned some things along the way as well.
So, Amira, I want to talk a little bit about that with yourself. At which point have you been uncomfortable? What was that like for you before you were able to put in the practice of the things that you talk about now?
So many options to choose from when I was uncomfortable. You know, I would say back in my daughter now, she's 12 and a half. The half is very important to her. She will be 13 in February. And so she was born in 2013. And that was a really big year for me individually, for me and my husband in our life. And I think anytime some giant milestone, like being responsible for a tiny human, for example, happens, it makes you rethink a lot about life and it makes you take stock. And that was a really uncomfortable year for me personally, and my own evolution, partly because, um, my husband and I both grew up in very faith based households. Both of our parents were ministers and pastors. And so I think anyone who's grown up in a similar lifestyle will understand that there were just a lot of boxes we were put in terms of how we could think, how we could move through the world. And I think having a child and especially having a young girl who had become a young woman just really gave me pause and made me uncomfortable thinking about the world that I was handed as a young woman is not the world I want her handed as a young woman. And I don't know if I can keep participating in the communities and the boxes and the norms and the rules that I have been this entirety of my life any longer. I actually don't know if I still align to or believe those things because it's no longer just about me. There is now this little person that I'm responsible for. And it just opened up a can of worms for me and a big can of discomfort for how I was thinking about the world. And so I really had to pause and take stock of what do I actually believe? Do I believe these things because I do or because they were handed to me since childhood? And what do I want to hand over to my child now that she exists in the world? And so that was a major pivot point for me was having this little human and really taking stock of, regarding faith, regarding politics, regarding culture, regarding, even just community and friendships. What do I believe because I want to and because I've chosen to versus what was handed to me? And what was instilled in me. And so I took a few years to really take stock, and my whole life shifted after 2013 in really beautiful and powerful ways because I found myself finally, instead of just sitting pretty, playing nice in the boxes I was told to sit in, I practiced nerve of choosing, well, here's what I actually believe now that I've unpacked it, and here's who I actually want to be in the world. 2013 was that big year for me.
What was that like? Do you have a moment where you first practiced that?
Oh, and I first practiced it. That's a really good question. There were a lot of small moments, like we were talking about earlier, these small behaviors, just little simple things like whether or not we wanted to have our child baptized, for example, was a big hullabaloo of a conversation with the family. The conversation about whose last name is the child taking, both of ours, a hyphenated name or my husband's name. There were a lot of small moments of practicing that nerve and moving through that discomfort for me. And I think one of the biggest ones is that we ultimately decided at the time we happened to be living in Dallas, Texas, here in the US. And we ultimately decided to leave that state and place because we felt that culturally it no longer aligned with the way we wanted to raise up a child in the world and a lot of the beliefs that we held and the community we wanted to build. And so that's one of the reasons we pivoted and moved back to Northern California. We felt like the ethos of the people and the culture and the upbringing our child would have here in the West Coast would be very different from the Deep South. And that was a really big and uncomfortable conversation with loved ones and family. And obviously came with a lot of what's the word? It was a big move, right? It costs money, you have to change jobs. And so that was a really big moment for us of deciding that. And I do believe that where we are place based can have a significant impact on your worldview and how you build community and who you're in community with. And so for us, it changed the entire trajectory of, I think, our life and in many ways, some of our belief system to be based here versus in the deep South where we once were.
Love that example. The fact that you took such a personal, I guess, approach to making those subtle changes in terms of having the nerve or having the audacity to speak up and really reflect on what's happening and where you want to go. I'm a firm believer that when I think about things that you do in your life, things that require discipline, things that
Mm.
require focus, I'm a firm believer that if you can apply it to one area in your life, it could be those same fundamentals can be applied to other areas in your life. So,
Yes.
how did those personal pivots that you made, those personal
Mhm.
decisions of nerve, impact you on a corporate or professional level?
I think it made me braver in so many ways because, when it comes to familial relationships, parents and siblings and in laws, those are the people closest to you. And oftentimes, communicating any change or nerve or audaciousness can be most difficult with them because you're so close and you're connected. You don't want to hurt their feelings, you don't want to harm them, so those are often the places where you play nice as opposed to practicing nerve. And so I do think that those personal experiences made me braver in the professional setting and made me much more deliberate as I finally had a case study for I practiced nerve and audaciousness, and it didn't ruin my life. Right, so I had, like, some quick wins under my belt, and I felt braver. That's what I mean when I tell people just practice it once or twice in a small way, and you build that muscle and you get stronger, and I feel like having blown up my personal life and realizing, "Oh, I came out on the other end pretty okay." There's some people mad at me, but I came out pretty okay. I think I can practice this in other areas. I had this bravery and this strength in those muscles of nerve that I had not had before, that I felt, brave going into the boardroom, going into that professional networking meeting, to, like I said, those small doses of like speak up 1 minute earlier, post an opinion in the meeting or in the Slack channel, and have these sort of safe experiments where you train your mind and your body to survive that discomfort. And those personal experiences, I think, really gave me that to do it in the workplace. And I think what I became known for in particular in workplace was she always has so many questions. And I talk a lot now in my consulting and coaching about how I use inquiry as a strategy. And there was a time in life where I never would have asked a question. I wouldn't have raised my hand to say, "Oh, actually, can we reconsider this, or does that still serve us? Is that really the direction we want to go?" And now I have a million questions, and I'm the person who says, my favorite people are the ones who question everything. And I would never have done that years ago before 2013 and that sort of big momentous time of choosing discomfort and getting comfortable with discomfort.
Think that's the Virgo in us. We just
It
have a lot of
is.
questions. We just want to ask why. I'm one of those people. I need to break things down to the smallest atom before I'm
Believe.
able to move forward. It's like, let
Yeah.
me break this down, please. I need to ask a lot of questions. And hearing you talk, it sounds like part of having the audacity, so to speak, that nerve, it
Mhm.
could be done through just asking questions, being curious.
Yes, I love curiosity as, a way to be oriented. Be an insatiably curious person. And like you said, as Virgos, we always have the questions. We're very curious people and we want to know how things work. And I think the more people that practice that, um, I tell people get curious instead of defensive. Even when someone comes to you with an uncomfortable question or makes you uncomfortable, just ask. And even if you pause and say to yourself, even if not out loud, just internally, like, okay, what is this moment and this discomfort I'm feeling trying to teach me? What can I take from this? Right? Get curious, not defensive. And I think if more of us did that in the world of work, in the world of community, in our home life, you name it, that we could reimagine the world in such big ways. Get curious, not defensive.
You mentioned community a lot. What does community mean to you and how has it helped you?
It is everything, right? are not meant to live life and do life alone. And community and connection and doing life with other humans is what we were built to do and meant to do. Even though, again, as a Virgo, I would prefer to be in the middle of the woods by myself quietly, no other humans most times. This is a very Virgo behavior also, but
Can I ask, if you're in the woods, are you glamping or are you roughing it?
oh, we're glamping. You know we are. I mean, come on.
All right, all right,
We're not sleeping on the ground. We are glamping.
all
There's a
right.
pillow nearby, maybe a portable air conditioner, you know?
There we go. There we go.
And so I talk about community because it is what we are built for as humans is to have other humans with us. We're not meant to do any of this alone. We learn from each other. We push each other. We encourage each other. And I think some of it might have to do with my upbringing. You know, I grew up in a tiny, tiny place. So my parents were missionaries, I mentioned. And we grew up on the tiny island of Guam, which is a US territory, and it is 30 miles long, 8 miles wide. It is tiny. So a lot of people who grew up in a small town or community will know very much what my childhood and upbringing was like. Everybody knows everybody. You're probably related. All the drama everyone's aware of and gossiping about it, and snickering about it. But in this tiny place, you know, I learned very early on about these ideas of you know, reciprocity and mutuality. Of I have something to give, you have something to give, and we all have skin in the game here, and we all need each other. We all bring something very different, and the different things we each bring are necessary parts of the recipe, if you will. We all have different ingredients that make the meal amazing. And so I try to show up and bring my part. And when I look around the table and there's an ingredient missing, I try to bring someone else in as well so that we can, you know, make it something great.
It's incredible. How does one who's listening to this and may ask that question, how do I find community? What does that
Well,
look like?
you know, it is in so many different ways. For me, one of the things that happened in the midst of, you know, our that global experiment COVID that we all experienced together, very quickly we had just moved to the town we were living in, and I didn't have a lot of community, but through a lot of, you know, community groups on like Facebook and things, found a lot of like-minded, whether it was parents or activists who really cared about what was happening at the time with healthcare and you know, schools shutting down and what we do for our kids. And so I think find the areas of your life where you know, you are most passionate about. I tell people, like, what is it you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? And in some cases, what can you be paid for? And where can you find community around those four different things? You know, one of the things that I love, we love hiking. And so I found community through other Black hiking groups in the Bay Area where I live. That's something I love, something I'm good at. I am a professional communicator and writer, and every year in July I go to this writers retreat with 24 other writers, and they're all good at writing too. And I found community that way. What does the world need? I think the world needs more people who say the quiet parts out loud, and I've found a community of people by chance on TikTok who just say the things. And I've started making videos about how to practice nerve and not be silent. And then, you know, what can you be paid for? People love to pay me to speak about communications, and I found a community through that as well. So I think there are different intersections of those four things of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for, where, you know, find those communities, whether it's in person, online, at school, through your faith groups, through your children's school groups and other fellow parents. Think of it that way. I think that's an easy framework. Those four ways. Find those intersections and you'll find your people.
You love what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can make money at.
Yeah.
Love that. That's incredible, and that's helpful a lot. I know community is so important, and like you said, we are social animals by nature,
Uh,
and it's so important that we surround ourselves as much as possible with community, both family and otherwise. So let's talk a little bit about your book. What is this book about?
Yeah, I happened to get a few early print copies. It's so pretty. I'm gonna hold it up here. The Price of Nice.
Amazing.
And I think the easiest way to describe it, I'm gonna read you what I said on the back cover because I worked real hard on it. It's real simple, but I say, stop being nice to start making change. And that from childhood, we're conditioned to be quote unquote nice. And nice to me means conflict avoidance, pleasing others, playing it safe. But what if that collective fixation with nice is actually preventing real progress in workplaces and society? And in this book, I give a lot of those behavioral communications tools that I've learned and honed and perfected over the years and unpack how niceness, I describe it as a velvet glove over an iron fist. And I'm a very visual person as a Virgo, so I needed that. I was like, "What does it look like?" It's a velvet glove over an iron fist, so it kinda has the veneer of pretty on the outside, but inside it's hard and it's gonna hurt, and it's actually not the most helpful thing. And so, this book for me and for others, I hope, is a call to, um not to abandon kindness, but to choose courage over comfort and to practice the antithesis of nice, which is nerve. And nerve can be as simple as asking more questions, saying the quiet parts out loud, speaking up, or making one choice, one behavior change, one decision that could potentially have the power to change things for you or for the people around you, or for some, the entirety of the world. So I'm hoping to give people those tools that I've learned to practice nerve and to be just a little bit more audacious.
And and that's awesome, and I'm so glad you did this. Can you talk about maybe some of the tools, maybe a couple tools that you
Yeah.
have?
I call them promising practices in the book. One of my favorite ones is that tool that I learned back in 2013 with that consultant who was helping us rewrite our strategic plan, and it was a creative journal. And one of the reasons I love it, I am still a journaler and I'm very analog. So I tell people I have like 50 million physical journals in my house, in my car, and my bedside on the dining room table. And as a writer, that makes sense. I write all the time, but one of the things that that journal provided to us as a team early on was just an intentional pause. And I think that's something that we could use more of. This consultant asked us to write down behaviors, system, processes, or policies that are unchallenged and unchanged that are creating friction and frustration in the organization. And I think the same is true in life, in workplaces, even in your home life. And, having that intentional practice of pausing and asking, does this process still serve us? Does it still serve enough of us, all of us? Does this policy still serve us? Can be a very simple but very revealing practice. And so that's one of the tools that I give people. I also talk a lot about mental models in this book because it's a tool that I use a lot in communications. And a mental model, just very simply, is how you think about and process the world. And I talk about how the advent of understanding mental models is that they are not fixed. Mental models can be shifted and changed. And as a person who is open to evolving, you can change how you see and perceive the world with the right tools in hand. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that goes back to the idea of being curious constantly and insatiably. I always, as a leader, I try to show up with the orientation of there are some things that I'm wrong about. I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all right. And that leans into that curiosity and this idea that you can shift your mental models, um, about how you think about the world. I think an easy example for many of us is, the constant conversation right now about hybrid workplaces. I think there's a mental model of work only works if you're in person. And many of us have had to shift that mental model of, okay, but how could we do this if it was half and half or if people were remote? How could we still connect? How could we still be productive? And how could we shift the way and the world of work if we could shift our thinking? And so I give people a lot of tools for the step by step of, okay, how do you do that? How do you identify your mental models and then shift them slowly over time?
Yeah, though it's interesting how you talk about you have journals all over the place. I think I have lip balm all over the place. I probably have it in every jacket in my closet, every
Also
drawer,
good to have
upstairs,
on hand.
downstairs.
Very important.
I am oh, it's absolutely ridiculous how much lip balm I have. But yeah, that's my journal. I actually tried journaling. Journaling for me is it's very therapeutic. I haven't
Yeah.
found a consistency with it, but when I have done it, it's like this mental model of walking into your bedroom and there's clothes all over the place. And I
Yes.
feel like that's my mind a lot of the times. And every time I journal, it's like my room is now clean and it's tidy and all my things are folded
Mm.
and all my things are hung up. So I don't have that weight of worrying about it as much because it's now lifted off of my shoulders. So
Mm.
I found journaling to be like that. And I know obviously it is for you. You're much more versed in it than I am, but I definitely will advocate for anybody who's looking at journaling. Just start, and I'm learning a lot. Like I've learned if you write one page a day, in a year you could have a book. So
That's
it's
right.
like breaking things down to the smallest pieces. I think
Yes.
really helps put things in perspective and not make things so overwhelming. Now, speaking of overwhelming, you talk about the mental models and shifting.
Mhm.
W- in some ways, I'm going to be the advocate here. I'm going to be a devil's advocate here. And I'm going to say to you, you know what? It's just not healthy for me. The amount of nerve I had to put forward, the amount of audacity I've had
Mm.
to put forward, the amount of times I've had to advocate for something or suggest something or help people see something different.
Mm.
And it's just not sinking through. What is my breaking point? What is my threshold? How will I recognize that? When does
Mm.
self-care come into play? And then when does the walking away without feeling defeated come into play, if that's possible?
Yeah. I think what I would encourage that I have seen and learned over time and in moments I didn't expect it is that, there's that quipped saying of someone's always watching. And it's true. Someone is always watching. I think for me, it has been frustrating to feel like I'm always the one practicing nerve. Like, who else is going to stand up and do it? And sometimes, particularly when you're in a leadership role in an organization, you won't often hear feedback from people and you won't often hear how the thing you said or the thing you didn't say or the thing you did or the way you moved through the organization really impacted someone. And I have found that people have come back years later. I mean, years, like decades sometimes. Sometimes there are people who come to me who I haven't seen in 10 years who will say, there was a moment when you said this thing in this meeting, or when you moved through the organization in XYZ way consistently, and it really impacted me. It reshaped how I think about leadership. It reshaped how I chose to show up. And so I just encourage people that that is so often the case, that someone is always watching and you won't always understand the impact that you are having in the moment. That is not a reason not to do it. And also to always practice the self care of deciding in this moment, are you practicing nerve at a 2 on the dial or at a 10? There are some days where I too, as someone who wrote a whole book about it, I just can't. I have to protect my peace. I need to rest and I need to let someone else step into practicing nerve. And that's okay too. There is no right or wrong to when you choose to practice the nerve. It really is about where you are emotionally and psychologically and in the process of change. But know that even if you don't see the impact of your nerve and audaciousness immediately, I promise you someone is watching and it is impacting someone, and you may never know. But I tell people all the time, I do it anyhow. I do it anyhow because I truly believe that each of us has a role to play. We all have skin in the game, and that I'm going to practice the nerve because I believe it the right thing to do. And the more of us who do it, the more we can actually create those external shifts on what the world and the workplace and our communities and our places of worship and our homes and our schools. actually look like.
That's beautiful. Who's this book for?
I say in the intro very specifically that one of the key audiences I wrote this book for are communicators. But then I go on to say if you're a teacher, you're a communicator. If you are a politician, you're a communicator. If you have a job, you're a communicator. If you're a parent, you're a communicator. We all communicate and connect in some way, shape, or form. And when you're writing a book, they make you choose. So while this book isn't written to everyone, it is for everyone, is the way I couched it in the intro. So communication is connection. That's how we connect. We connect with our words, with our body language, and the different subtle ways that we communicate. And all of us are communicating all the time in our lives at varying levels. And I truly believe that even if you're not a professional communicator, you're going to get something from this book in how you communicate in your life and in your relationships, no matter the formal role or title that you hold.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about even the most simplest cases, like if you're at a restaurant and your food comes out and it's a little bit cold. Typically, I'm the type of person, I admit it, I won't say anything. I'll just deal with it most times. Like, it has to be really, really off of what I expect
Yeah.
for me to say something. But there's times where I just want to speak up. Now, my mother, who's Jamaican, she will speak up.
Yeah.
It could be
That's
done
right. I bet.
perfectly, and she will speak up about something. And I think it's probably because, and I know where it comes from, is because I sit there thinking about when I was young. I was so embarrassed when my mom would
Mhm.
do that. And I remember being in a restaurant with her and just being like, "Oh my gosh," putting my head down like, "Mom, like, what are you doing?" Like, you're just so like, you're so honest. And but in a lot of ways it's advantageous, because then
Right.
sometimes when we go to Jamaica and we're going to a flea market or something, I'm like, "Hey mom, can you talk to the seller for me?" Right? Because my mom would have a better ability to negotiate. So I really admire, my mom definitely has nerve. She definitely has
I
audacity,
love
and
it.
I'm starting to transition from, the embarrassment to actually the application of it in my own life. But
Right.
speaking of application, and I know people are going to read this book, they're going to be at different places, they're going to be at different points in their lives, different roles, and
Mm.
they may approach it in a different area or a part or spectrum of their lives and relationships. So I guess I don't know if this will be a hard question for you to answer, or really define, but what do you want people to walk away with after reading this book?
So I'll talk about the framework, and then the number one thing I want people to walk away with for sure is the acknowledgement and recognition that continuing to play nice, the stakes are too high. That the cost, the price of nice that I talk about, the stakes are too high. And I really think that it is not too audacious to say that the stakes are a tax on our humanity. If we continue to maintain the status quo instead of progressing together. And so the way I formatted the book is a four-part framework for actually how professional communicators move through our work. And we took it from the world of social psychology. It's think, feel, do, revisit. And any communicator would have heard this. So in the book, I frame think as, reframe your narrative around what's possible, because we've been taught to maintain the status quo in so many areas of life. This is how it's always been. This is how it has to be. These are the norms. This is the box you're in. So reframe your narrative about what's possible and what's quote unquote normal. In the fill section, I talk about how to and give people tools to manage the emotions tied to change and to sitting with that discomfort, right? There's fear, there's excitement, but there's also loss that comes with it. And you have to move through that. In the do section, I talk about taking those micro actions towards the pivot, right? Whether it's a resume refresh, networking, content creation, flipping tables, moving across the country, you name it, saying the quiet parts out loud, those micro actions, and giving people examples of those daily tweaks you can make that will have an impact over time And then finally, the revisit section where you evaluate your own progress regularly and you recalibrate. Like I said, you practice nerve at a different spot on the dial depending on the day, sometimes the hour, sometimes the people, the context, and the situation. And we will never arrive. It is a constant revisiting of the tools and the feelings and the micro actions that you're participating in to have more nerve in this world. So that's what I offer to people: think, feel, do, revisit, and a reminder that there is a tax on our humanity if we just keep maintaining the status quo and playing nice.
Incredible. How did you find yourself on the other end of this book? What was Amira's transformation after
Mm,
finishing this?
that's such a good question. I feel like I felt lighter. There is it's a really hard process to become a producer of knowledge, right? When you're writing a whole book, they told me 45,000 words and I got stuck at 10,000. I was like, I don't think I can do this. I ended up with 67,000 and then they said, nope, you have to cut words. And I was like, what? But, I felt lighter because I think for me, when you are going through your own pivot and journey, you're practicing these things, but to sit down and put pen to paper on essentially the way I have been living my life and the way that I have been thinking and how my mind works, it was clarity even for me of, "Oh, yeah, that is how I do that." Like, that is how I got from A to B on that situation at work or that really hard thing with family and that conversation of there was a framework to it. It wasn't happenstance. It wasn't by chance. Like, no, there were specific mental models I had. There were specific steps I took. And there's a method to the madness of practicing nerve. And so I felt clearer about how I live my life. And I felt proud, but I also felt lighter. Like, even I know how to do this better now because I took a moment to sit down and to write it. And I hope others will find that it helps them feel a little bit lighter too, to know that there is a way through that discomfort and there is a different way to be than perhaps what you've been handed.
That's incredible. It sounds like a very fulfilling journey, and congratulations.
You.
It's not an easy task to put in the work, to put in the time, to put in the commitment, but at the end of it, you're helping and impacting so many people. Um, Amira, has there been anything in this conversation that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I don't think so. We covered so much. I'm just glad to have the conversation. It's, you know, so interesting. You never know what's going to come out of, right? Because we didn't pre-plan questions. We're just chatting and having a conversation.
Yeah.
So, no, just thank you for the time to reflect. Every time I have a conversation like this, I too walk away with reflections and with a little nugget or something. So, thank you for that gift to me.
I try to be Santa Claus at times. So this is the part of the conversation where you read a letter to your former self, your opportunity to speak to your past and what you would say. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for this prompt. I love this idea. And so I did sit with this over the last couple of weeks. And so I have my notes here. So here is my letter to my younger self. Dear younger me, you don't have to keep contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for you. I know you've been told that being nice will open doors, that blending in will keep you safe. But let me tell you, your nerve, your questions, and your willingness to be inconvenient are far more valuable than your compliance. One day, you'll learn that authenticity isn't about being agreeable. It's about being anchored in justice, even when it costs you comfort. Trust your voice. The very thing you think makes you too much is exactly what the world needs from you. And when you doubt yourself, remember the mantra you'll one day pass to your daughter every morning before she goes to school. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, which isn't much. In other words, live boldly, love fiercely, and don't shrink yourself for anyone, anytime. Keep going. The future you is proud. With love, me.
That was absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Um, and I know your younger self is listening, and in another multi-universe is going to take heed to those words. So, Amira, thank you so much for this conversation today. It was a pleasure, and I wish you all the best and success for yourself, your family, and your loved ones.
Likewise, my friend. Thank you.